Hey everybody! Thank you guys so much for joining me tonight here on my channel, The Magical Solution. We are on YouTube, we're on TikTok, and we are in my private Facebook group, The Magical Solution. This is how we grow. We are continuing on with our book, The Spirits Book by Allan Kardec. We are on chapters 37 through 40. We are almost done. Look, this is it. This is it, you guys. We're almost done. I'm so excited. All right. So for those of you who are joining me for the first time, I know many of you on TikTok are joining me for the first time. Many of you here on YouTube are joining me for the first time. My name is Leilani, owner of The Magical Solution. I am doing this series because there are a lot of practitioners out there who have a difficult time reading, who suffer from a lot of developmental disabilities, intellectual disabilities, and or ADHD or attention disabilities. And sometimes being read to is one of the only ways that they can retain information. And this book, I always feel, is so essential for people who consider themselves psychics or mediums, people who want to work with spirits of the dead, people who want to work and learn about spirits overall. This book, along with his other book called The Medium's Book, are sort of the doctrine, if you will, of Espiritismo and Spiritism, in the sense that they really lay the groundwork and the foundation of mediumship. Okay, now this first book, as we've spoken about before, really gets into a lot of stuff: the metaphysics, the physics, the science, the spirit, the laws of natural laws, the anatomy of spirit, and everything. And it's written from the perspective of Allan Kardec, who was a scientist and an educator at the time that he wrote this book, back in like the 1600s or 1800. I honestly don't remember. I'll have to look that up again. And he wrote this, from the perspective of being a skeptic. And he interviewed a lot of psychic mediums, and they answered his questions by channeling spirits. So it's written in a very conversational format. So it's like him asking the question, the spirit answering the question, et cetera, et cetera. So, and then once we're done with this one, we're going to read the Medium's Book together. And that one is all about mediumship and this idea of like the ethics of mediumship and like how we go about doing it and all that good stuff. So let's get to it. So the chapter that we're on today is the law of justice, love, and charity. And the subcategories that are in this chapter are justice and natural rights, the right of ownership, theft, charity and love for our neighbor, and maternal and filial love. Okay, so those are the subjects we'll be talking about. So let's get to it. Justice and natural rights. Question 873. Is the sentiment of justice to be found in nature itself, or is it the result of acquired ideas? It is so natural that you revolt at the thought of an injustice. Moral progress undoubtedly develops this sentiment, but it does not create it. God has placed it in the human heart. That is why you frequently find among simple and unlearned people notions of justice that are more exact than those among very knowledgeable ones. 874. If justice is a law of nature, how may it be explained that people understand it so differently, and that what one individual considers just appears unjust to another individual? It is because the passions are usually mingled with the sentiment of justice, thereby altering it. The same thing occurs with the majority of the other natural sentiments, and it causes things to be seen from erroneous points of view. Question 875. How may justice be defined? Justice consists in respecting the rights of every person. And what determines those rights? They're determined by two things: human law and natural law. Because humans have established laws that are appropriate for their customs and character, such laws have established rights that can vary with progress. Though your current laws are not perfect, They do not consecrate the same rights as the laws of the medieval area, for instance. Even though those rights seem monstrous to you and are now obsolete, they seemed just and natural at the time. Therefore, the rights established by humans do not always conform to justice. They only regulate certain social relations, whereas in private life, there are a huge number of actions that are the exclusive jurisdiction of the court of consciousness. 876. Okay, well, out, outside the rights consecrated by human law, what is the basis of justice founded on in natural law? Christ has told you, do unto others whatsoever you would have them do unto you. God has placed in the human heart the rule of all true justice through the desire that all deserve to see their rights respected. If you are uncertain of what you should do for your neighbor in any given circumstance, ask yourself, what would you want your neighbor to do to you in a similar situation? God could not give you a safer guide than your own conscience. Whew, shit, I love that. In fact, the criterion of true justice is in desiring for others what we would desire for ourselves. It is not in desiring for ourselves what we would desire for others, which is not at all the same thing. Since it is not natural to desire our own harm, then if we take our personal desire as the norm or starting point, we can be certain that we will never desire for our neighbor anything except what is good. In all ages and in all belief systems, humans have always sought to enforce their own personal rights. The sublimity of the Christian religion was to take personal rights as the basis for the rights of the neighbor. 877. Does the necessity of living in society impose any special obligations on humankind? Yes. And for the and the ugh, and the first of all is that of respecting the rights of others. Those who respect the rights of others will always be just. In your world where so many do not practice the law of justice, everyone resorts to reprisals. And that is what causes trouble and confusion in your society. Social life bestows rights and imposes reciprocal duties. 878. Since humans can be mistaken as to the extent of their rights, what guidelines can enable them to know what limits to set on such rights? The limit of the right that they recognize for others in relation to themselves under the same circumstances, and vice versa. Okay, but if all attributed to themselves the rights of their neighbor, what becomes of subordination to superiors? I mean, wouldn't that cause anarchy regarding all positions of power? Natural rights are the same for everybody, from the least to the greatest. God has not made some from purer clay than others, and are all equal in the divine sight. These rights are eternal, whereas those established by humans perish with their institutions. Moreover, all individuals sense their own strength or weaknesses and will always show a certain deference, to those who deserve it because of their virtue and wisdom. It is important to point out so that those who think they are superior may know their responsibilities for deserving such deference. Subordination will never be compromised if authority is in conformance with wisdom. 879. What would be the character of those who practice justice in all its purity? They would be truly just and would be following Jesus' example because they would practice both charity and love toward their neighbor, without which there is no real justice. Okay, we're now on the right of ownership and theft. 880. Yeah, these chapters go like really fast. 880. What is the first of all the natural rights of humans? The right to stay alive. That is why no one has the right to assault a fellow human being's life or do anything that may compromise his or her corporal existence. 881. Does the right to stay alive give them the right to accumulate what is needed to live on and to retire when they can no longer work? Yes, but they must do this as a family, like the bee, through honest labor and not by accumulating assets as selfish individuals. Certain animals set an example of such foresight. Do humans have the right to defend what they have accumulated through their labor? Hasn't God said, "Do not steal"? And Jesus said, "Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's"? Assets that humans accumulate through honest labor are legitimate property and they have the right to defend because ownership that is the fruit of labor comprises a natural right that is as sacred as the right to work and to stay alive. Is the desire to possess natural? Yes. But when humans desire to possess only for themselves and for their own personal satisfaction, it is selfish. Okay, nevertheless, isn't the desire to possess legitimate since the one who has enough to live on is not a burden to others? There are insatiable individuals who accumulate possessions without benefit to anyone else, or merely to satisfy their passions. Do you believe that this is approved by God? Those who accumulate assets through their labor and with the intention of helping their neighbor practice the law of love and charity, and their labor is blessed by God. 884. What is the characteristic of legitimate ownership? There is only one legitimate ownership: owning something that has been acquired without harm to others. The law of love and justice forbids us to do to others what we would not want them do to us. And by this same principle, it condemns every means of acquiring property that is contrary to that. 885. Is the right of ownership unlimited? Of course. Everything that is legitimately acquired represents proper ownership. But, as we have said, human legislation is imperfect and it frequently sanctions conventional rights that natural justice does not approve of. That is why humans reform their laws as they make progress and as they better comprehend justice. What appears perfect in one century appears barbaric in the next. What kind of century you think, y'all, that we live in now? Because it looks pretty darn barbaric to me. I don't know. All right, we're now on the chapter of charity and love for our neighbor. Okay. Oh, thank you. Pseudopasta. That's a cool name. 886. What is the true meaning of the word charity? Like the one that Jesus understood of. Benevolence toward everyone, indulgence toward the imperfections of others, and forgiveness for their offenses. Love and charity supplement the law of justice because loving our neighbors is to do them all the good possible, all that we would wish to be done to ourselves. Such is the meaning of Jesus' words. Love one another as brothers. Charity, according to Jesus, is not restricted to the almsgiving, but embraces all our relations with our fellow humans, whether in situations below, equal, or superior to our own. It orders it orders us to be indulgent because we need indulgence of ourselves, and it forbids us to humiliate the unfortunate, contrary to what is commonly practiced. However, oh, I'm sorry, whenever wealthy persons seek us out, we regard them with an overabundance of consideration and attention. But whenever poor persons seek us out, it seems like we do not want to be troubled by them at all. However, the more pitiable the situation of the latter, the more we should refrain from increasing their disgrace through humiliation. Those who are truly charitable seek to uplift the self esteem of those in lower positions, thereby diminishing the distance between us. 887. Well, Jesus also taught love your enemies. But isn't loving your enemies contrary to our natural tendencies? And doesn't enmity proceed from a lack of sympathy between spirits? It is obviously not possible to show tender and passionate love towards one's enemies. And that is not what Jesus wanted to say. Loving one's enemies means to forgive them and to return good for their evil. That is how we put ourselves above them. By seeking vengeance, we only place ourselves beneath them. 888. What is to be thought of almsgiving? So that's like, like donations, giving food out, clothes, things like that. Those who are reduced to begging for alms morally and physically degrade themselves in an existence that puts them on the level of the brute. A society based on the law of God and just should provide for the life of the weak without humiliating them. It should ensure an existence for those who cannot work without leaving them at the mercy of chance and goodwill. So in that statement, he's not saying that someone who's out there begging a, is degrading. He's saying the act of doing that is degrading for them, and that we as a society should have a system that is built so that we can care for those who are suffering like that without humiliating them and without having to put them in situations where they are humiliated. That's what he means. And I know, like, the way he writes it, it makes it sound like he's judging them, but that's not what he meant. Then do you condemn almsgiving? No, because it is not the almsgiving per se that is reprehensible, but almost always the way in which it is done. Moral individuals, those who understand charity according to Jesus, seek out the unfortunate without waiting for them to hold out their hand. True charity is always good and benevolent. It is a demonstrated both in the act itself and in the way it is done. A service rendered with graciousness thus has a double value, but it is rendered with happiness. The recipient's need compels him or her to accept it, but his or her heart will hardly be touched. Also, remember that in God's sight, ostentation erases the merit of benevolence. Jesus said, "Do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing." Therein, he teaches you not to tarnish charity with pride. It is necessary to distinguish between almsgiving per se and benevolence. The one who is most needy is not always the one who begs. Ooh, do you hear that? The one who is most needy is not always the one who begs. The fear of humiliation restrains the truly poor, who almost always suffer without complaining. It is these whom the authentically humane person should know how to seek out without being ostentatious. Love one another. That is the whole law, the divine law through which God governs the world. Love is the law of attraction for the living and organized beings, and attraction is the law of love for inorganic matter. Do y'all hear this? Do y'all hear what is he's saying right now? So while we're out here watching movies like The Secret and reading books by Eckhart Tolle, this guy back in the freaking 1800s, 1600s is talking about love being the law and attraction, the law of attraction being that thing that the law of love utilizes. It's the mechanics behind it. Back when we first read like the first 3 chapters of the book, I remember all of us were freaking out because he was talking about quantum physics. And this is a man who doesn't know shit about that. But the way that the spirits were describing it was exactly like describing quantum physics and the quantum field. I'm telling you, if you don't already have this book, get it. And when you read it, make sure you take a highlighter with you. Okay? All right. Never forget that a spirit, whatever its degree of advancement or its situation as an incarnate individual or as a discarnate spirit, is always placed between a more evolved spirit who guides and perfects it and a less evolved one toward whom it has the same duties to fulfill. Therefore, Being charitable not only by taking from your bag of coins that you callously give to one who dares to beg you, but by seeking out hidden poverty. Be indulgent towards the errors of your neighbor. Instead of despising the ignorant and the addict, educate and moralize them. Be gentle and benevolent towards all who are less evolved than you. Be the same toward the lowermost beings of creation as you are have obeyed, and you will have obeyed the law of God. Ugh. And that's actually what I just read was a quote from St. Vincent de Paul. Question 889. Aren't there those who are reduced to begging through their own fault? Yes, of course. But if a good moral education had taught them the law of God, they would not have fallen into the excesses that led them into ruin. It is upon this, above all, that the improvement of your globe depends. So we're now on the subject of maternal and filial love. 890. Is maternal love a virtue or is it an instinctive sentiment common to both humans and animals? It is both. Nature has endowed the mother with love towards her children in the interests of their preservation. But in the animal, this love is limited to the offsprings, material needs, and ceases when it is no longer needed. In humans, this love persists throughout life and consists in devotedness and self denial that comprises true virtues. It even survives death itself, accompanying the child from beyond the grave. You can see that this sort of love contains something more than the love displayed in the animal kingdom. 891. If maternal love is so natural, why are there mothers who hate their children and frequently from birth? So, postpartum depression, women who kill their children, things like that. It is sometimes a trial chosen by the spirit of the child, or it may be an expiation if the spirit itself had been a bad father or a bad mother or a bad child in another existence. In all such cases, a bad mother can only be animated by a little evolved spirit who seeks to create difficulties for the child so that he or she will fail in his or her chosen trial. Such a violation of the laws of nature, however, will not remain unpunished, and the spirit of the child will be rewarded for the obstacles it has overcome. 892. When parents have children who cause them grief, aren't they excused for not feeling the tenderness for them that they would have felt otherwise? No, for it is regarded as a task that has been entrusted to them, and their mission is to make every effort to lead them to do good. Besides, such grief is almost always the consequence of the bad habits that the parents have allowed their children to follow from the cradle. Thus, they reap what they sow. All right, you guys, we are now on a new chapter, and this chapter is called Moral Perfection. And the subcategories within this chapter are virtues and vices, the passions, selfishness, the characteristics of a moral person, and self-knowledge. So it seems like this chapter is going to go by pretty fast. Okay, moral perfection, vices, and virtues. 893. Which is the most meritorious of all the virtues? All virtues are meritorious because all are signs of progress on the path of the good. There is always virtue when there is voluntary resistance to the allure of wrongful tendencies. However, the highest virtue consists in the sacrifice of one's own interests for the good of one's neighbor without ulterior motives. The greatest merit is that which is based on the most disinterested charity. 894. There are persons who do good through a spontaneous impulse without having to struggle with any contrary sentiment. Do they deserve the same merit as those who have to struggle against their own nature and who manage to overcome it? Those who do not have to struggle have already made progress. They struggled and triumphed in the past. That is why good sentiments cost them no effort and their actions seem so easy. Doing good has become a habit for them. They should be honored as old warriors who have earned their rank. Since you are still far from perfection, such examples surprise you by their contrast, and you admire them so much because they are rare. However, you must know that on worlds more advanced than yours, what is the exception among you has become the rule. The sentiment of the good is spontaneous everywhere on those worlds because they are inhabited by only good spirits. And a single bad intention would be a monstrous exception. That is why humans are so happy there. The same will occur on Earth when humanity transforms itself and when it understands and practices charity in its true meaning. So, I actually did a TikTok video about this that I decided not to publish because I felt that it sounded a little arrogant. But basically, it was the idea that, you know, people tend to glorify this idea of suffering and going through trauma and overcoming suffering and overcoming trauma and somehow equating that to being a much more powerful spiritual practitioner. And in the same breath, will make fun of or ridicule or look down their nose at people who haven't struggled as much as they have, but have the same kinds of gifts. And, I really want us as a community to start normalizing this idea that overcoming a struggle and overcoming a trauma is not a prerequisite to being a powerful spiritual person. And this book talks about it in the sense that you don't know that person's past life. That person who is really going easy in this life and really things are just coming so naturally to them and they have all this good luck and all that. That doesn't mean that they didn't struggle in past lives. That doesn't mean that they didn't earn this point in their trials and that their trials for this lifetime are going to be different. So, I just love the fact that it's written here, and I needed to find a more eloquent way of saying that in my TikTok video because I definitely sounded like a bitter Betty, so I never posted it, but we'll see. Okay, question 895. Besides the defects and vices about which no one can be mistaken, what is the most characteristic sign of imperfection? Self-interest. Moral qualities many times do not stand up when put to the test, like copper gilding that cannot withstand the test of the touchstone. Individuals may possess real qualities that make them appear moral to the world. However, while such qualities do indicate progress, they do not always bear up under certain trials, and sometimes it takes only one touch of self interest to unmask these individuals' real character. True selfishness true selflessness is in fact so rare on earth that it is admired as a remarkable phenomenon when it is displayed. Attachment to material things is a notorious indication of a little advanced spirit because the more humans are attached to things of this world, the less they understand their true destiny. Through selfish through selflessness, however, they show that they see their future from a more evolved point of view. I've always said this, and I remember, back in the day, there was like a huge movement of magical practitioners who would say, "Oh, you can always tell the fake ones from the real ones because the real ones can manifest wealth in their life. Like, they'll have the nice cars, they'll have the big houses, they'll have the jewelry, they'll have all this stuff because they're real magical practitioners. They can manifest those things and make those things happen." And this book and myself and my background I come from the perspective of material things are not a measure of how magical and how spiritual you are. If anything, they are a measure of how much in decline your spirit is because you're so attached to the material world. And just because your spirit and your morals are declining and attached to the material world doesn't mean that you're not a powerful magician. You could be a very powerful magician and manifest a lot of things, but your spirit might be trash. And one of the indications of your spirit being trash is being connected to and really like clinging onto things, material things. 896. There are selfless individuals who nonetheless lack discernment and who waste their possessions without real benefit because they do not know how to use them reasonably. Will they have any merit? They have merit for their selflessness, but not for the potential good they could do. If selflessness is a virtue, thoughtlessness, squandering is always, at the very least, a lack of judgment. Fortune is not given to some to be cast to the wind any more than it is given to others to be locked up in a safe. It is a deposit for which they will have to render account. They will have to answer for all the good they could have done but did not do, and for all the tears they could have dried with the money they gave away to those who were not actually needy. Woo! 897. Are those blameworthy who do good without seeking a reward on earth, but in the hope that it may be taken into account in the next life, so that their situation there may be better? And does such a thought harm their advancement? So basically, what he's asking is people who are doing good on earth only so that they can go to heaven or only so that they can have a better afterlife, does that diminish their good deeds? One must do good out of charity, that is, selflessly. Period, point blank. That's what the Spirit said. Okay, nevertheless, all have the very natural desire to progress in order to emerge from the painful situation of this life. The spirits teach us to do good with that purpose in mind. So, would it be wrong to think that through practicing the good, we may have hope for a better situation? Certainly not. However, those who do good without ulterior motives, who do it for the sole pleasure of being pleasing to God and their suffering neighbor, have already found a certain degree of advancement, which will enable them to attain happiness more quickly than those who do good through calculation and not through natural impulse of their heart. So he's saying just the act of charity in and of itself, that's in a selfless from a selfless perspective, is already something that has already put you in favor. You don't have to be calculative about it. You just do, and you will be fine. So shouldn't we make a distinction here between the good that can be done for our neighbor and the care we devote to correcting our own defects? I mean, we know that doing good with the thought that it will be counted to us in the next life has little merit, but would it also be a sign of impurity if we were to amend ourselves, conquer our passions, and correct our character with the aim of bringing ourselves nearer to good spirits and of receiving a higher position in the spirit world? No, 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 no. By doing good, we merely mean being charitable. Those who calculate what each one of their good actions can render them in the other life or in the earthly life proceed selfishly. But there is no selfishness in improving oneself in the hope of drawing nearer to God, because that is the objective for all. 898. Since the corporal life is only an ephemeral sojourn on this world, and since our future life should be our principal concern, Is it worthwhile to put forth the effort to acquire scientific knowledge that only bears upon material things and necessities? Absolutely. First, it enables you to help your brothers and sisters. Next, your spirit will evolve more quickly if it has progressed intellectually. In the hiatus between incarnations, you will learn in 1 hour what would require years on earth. No knowledge is useless. It all contributes in some degree to advancement because the perfected spirit must know everything. Since progress must be made in every sense, all acquired ideas help the development of the spirit. 899. Of two wealthy individuals, one was born in opulence and has never known need, whereas the other owes his fortune to his own labor. However, both employ their wealth exclusively for their own personal satisfaction. Which one is more culpable? The one who has known hardship. He knows what it means to suffer and does not relieve it in others. As usually happens, he no longer remembers his hardship. 900. Do those who continue to accumulate assets without benefiting anyone have a valid excuse in saying that they are doing so in order to leave the assets to their heirs? It attests to their bad principles. Period. 901. Of two misers, the first deprives himself of necessities and dies of want atop his treasures, whereas the second is only stingy towards others, but is extravagant towards himself. While he recoils before the smallest sacrifice to render a service or do something useful, nothing seems better to him than satisfying his own tastes and passions. If a favor is asked of him, he is always ill willed, but if a whim strikes, he is always ready to satisfy it. Which of them is guiltier, and which of them will have the worst place in the spirit world? The one who spends it. He is more selfish than miserly. The other has already received part of his punishment. Mm. Is it wrong to desire wealth with the desire to do good? Such a sentiment is, of course, laudable if it is pure. But such a desire, always disinterested enough, does it not hide a personal ulterior motive? Is it not the first person to whom we wish to do good many times is our own self? Silly. 903. Is it wrong to study others' deficits? Ooh, that's a really good question. So it's like this idea of like watching other people's weaknesses so that you know how to manipulate and take advantage and get yours out of this. If it is for the purpose of criticizing and divulging them, it is wrong because it displays a lack of charity. If it is with the intention of applying it to oneself in order to avoid the same defects, it may be useful. You must not forget, however, that tolerance for the defects of others is one of the virtues entailed in charity. Before criticizing people's imperfections, think about whether others may say the same about you. So try to possess qualities that are opposite to the defects you criticize in others. This is a means of perfecting yourself. If you criticize them for being adventurous, be generous. For being prideful, be humble and modest. For being harsh, be kind. For acting with pettiness, be expansive in all your actions. In a word, act in such a way that these words of Jesus may not apply to you. You see the speck in your neighbor's eye, but do not see the beam in your own. 904. Is it wrong for a person to probe the ills of society and expose them? Well, that depends on the sentiment leading the person to do so. If a writer only wants to create a scandal, he or she does so out of personal pleasure. publishing material that generally sets a bad example rather than a good one. The spirit enjoys it, but it can be punished for the pleasure it feels in revealing wrongs. In such cases, how can we judge a writer's purity of intention and sincerity? This is not always useful. If the message is good, benefit from it. If it is bad, it becomes a problem for the writer's own conscience. Moreover, if a writer's desire to prove their sincerity, it falls to them to support their principles by setting their own example. You're not over here trying to be a mind reader. To be a good writer, you must be clear. 905. Some authors have published works that are beautiful and morally uplifting, which help the progress of humankind, but which they themselves do not take advantage of. As spirits, will the good they have done through their works be taken into account? So this is a great question. This is a really great question because we have seen time and time and time again gurus and famous people throughout history who have written books and who have marched and who have fasted and done all kinds of things for the sake of evolving their communities and their countries, right? So people like Gandhi, people like Martin Luther King, people like Saint Teresa. They've written books, they've marched, they've done all kinds of things that will help to elevate their brothers and sisters. But Gandhi constantly beat on his wife, right? Martin Luther King constantly cheated on his wife. Um, Saint Teresa had a lot of scandals with the charity that she did in these countries. So the question is, do all the things that they did for a face to show face and to help others, does that fall short because they themselves were kind of shitty people? Let's see. Morality without action is like the seed without the sowing. What use is the seed if you do not make it grow in order to feed you? Those persons are guiltier because they possess the intelligence to comprehend. Having not practiced the maxims they offered to others, they fail to harvest the fruit. 906. Is it reprehensible for those who do good to be conscious of their deeds and to acknowledge them to themselves? Well, since they can be aware of the evil they do, they must be equally aware of the good in order to know if they act rightly or wrongly. It is in weighing all their actions on the scales of God's law, especially on those of the law of justice, love, and charity, that they can tell whether their actions are good or bad, and thus approve or disapprove of them. Hence, they cannot be at fault for recognizing the fact that they have triumphed over their bad tendencies and for being satisfied for having done so, provided they do not grow vain, for they would be to fall into another wrong. All right, we're now on the subject of the passions. Now, remember, guys, I only read until 8 o'clock, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So even if we don't finish a chapter, I will stop at 8, okay? The passions. And we have 15 minutes. 907. Since the principle of our passions originates in nature, are they evil per se? No. Passion is the result of excess brought about by the will. Though the principle itself was given to humans for their good, the passions can lead them to do great things. Their abuse of them is what makes them evil. 908. How may we define the limit at which the passions cease to be good or bad? The passions are like a horse that is useful when controlled, but dangerous when it does the controlling. You can recognize when a passion becomes harmful at the moment in which you cease to govern it and when it results in any injury to yourself or to others. The passions are levers that increase humans' powers tenfold and help them to fulfill the designs of providence. However, if instead of directing their passions, they allow themselves to be directed by them, they fall into excess, and the very power which in their hands could have done good falls upon them and crushes them instead. All the passions have their principle in a sentiment or need of nature. Therefore, the principle of the passions is not evil, because it rests upon one of the providential conditions of our existence. Passion per se is the exaggeration of a need or a sentiment. It is in the excess and not in the cause. And such excess becomes evil when it results in some kind of evil. Every passion that brings us nearer to the animal nature takes us further from the spiritual nature. Every sentiment that lifts us above the animal nature announces the predominance of spirit over matter and draws us closer to perfection. 909. Could humans always overcome their bad tendencies through their own efforts? Yes, and sometimes with very little effort. What they lack is willpower. How few of you make such an effort, however. I love that. That's so great. 910. Can humans find in spirits an effective aid to help them overcome their passions? If you sincerely pray to God and your guardian angel, good spirits will certainly come to your aid. That is their mission. 911. Aren't there passions that are so alive and irresistible that the will is powerless to overcome them? There are many who say, I want to, but their will is only on their lips. They want, but they are very happy at not being able to do so. When they believe they cannot overcome their passions, it is because their spirit is pleased by them as a result of its own impurity. Those who try to restrain their passions understand their own spiritual nature, and overcoming them is a triumph of the spirit over matter. So, what he's saying here is everyone can overcome their passions, their excesses. Everyone can do this. But the willpower, the will to do so is a tough thing to attain. It's a tough thing to exercise because the will is like a muscle. And the reason why it's such a tough thing to exercise, according to this book, is because the spirit that's in you is very comfortable living in excess of passions. It's very comfortable not wanting to exercise the willpower. It's very comfortable keeping you in a stagnant state. And so the real true struggle and the true trial of a spiritual person is to push yourself, is to exercise that will muscle so that you can overcome these excesses and elevate your spirit. And that's a fucking hard thing to do. Literally, it takes lifetimes. 912. What is the most effective means of fighting the predominance of the corporal nature? Practicing self-denial. That's the answer. Practicing self-denial. All right. Let me just see how many pages we have because we have only 10 minutes and I just want to make sure. Oh, okay. We only have like 6 pages, so that's perfect. We're now on the subject of selfishness. 913. Of all the vices, which may we regard as the root of all the vices? We have already told you many times. Selfishness. All evil derives from it. Study all the vices and you will see that selfishness is at the very bottom of them all. As much as you may struggle against them, you will never uproot them as long as you have not destroyed their cause. Let all your efforts tend towards that end, because selfishness is the true scourge of society. Those in this life who want to approach moral perfection must uproot from their heart every sentiment of selfishness, for selfishness is incompatible with justice, love, and charity. It neutralizes all of their qualities. 914. Since selfishness is based on personal interests, it seems difficult to entirely uproot it from the human heart. I mean, will we ever be able to do so? As humans become enlightened about spiritual things, they attach less value to material things. Next, it is necessary to reform the human institutions that entertain and excite such attachments. This depends on education. Okay, well, since selfishness is inherent to the human species, won't it always be a permanent obstacle to the reign of absolute goodness upon earth? It is certain that selfishness is your greatest evil, but it is connected to the unpurified nature of spirits incarnated on the earth, and not to the human species per se. Upon purifying themselves over successive incarnations, spirits get rid of selfishness just as they get rid of other impurities. On the earth, where are on the earth, are there not persons who are divested of selfishness and who practice charity? They do exist in greater numbers than you think, but you know few of them because virtue does not seek to reveal itself in broad daylight. If there is one, why would there not be 10? If there is 10, why would there not be 1,000? And so on. 916. Far from decreasing, selfishness increases with civilization, which seems to excite and entertain it. How can the cause destroy the effect? Oof, these questions are hard. Let's see what the spirit has to say. The greater the evil, the more heinous it becomes. It has been necessary for selfishness to produce much evil in order to make you understand the need to uproot it. When human beings have been freed from the selfishness that dominates them, they will live as brothers and sisters. They will not wrong one another and will mutually help one another through the fraternal sentiment of solidarity. The strong will then be the supporter and not the oppressor of the weak. And no longer will anyone lack what is needed because all will practice the law of justice. This is the kingdom of the good, and the spirits are in charge of preparing it. 917. So, what is the means for destroying selfishness? Like, how do we do it? All human imperfections. The most difficult to uproot is selfishness because it is connected to the influence of matter, from which human beings, still so close to their origin, have not been able to free themselves. Everything concurs to sustain its influence: your laws, your social organizations, and your education. Selfishness will be weakened with the predominance of the moral life over the material life, and especially with the understanding that Spiritism gives you concerning your true future state, which is no longer distorted by allegorical fictions. When it is well understood and identified with customs and beliefs, Spiritism will transform habits, usages, and social relations. Selfishness is founded upon the importance of the personality. When well understood, I repeat, Spiritism enables you to see things from such an evolved point of view that the sentiment of the personality somehow disappears, so to speak, before the immensity of it all. Upon destroying this self importance, or at least showing it for what it's worth, Spiritism necessarily combats selfishness. It is the shock that humans experience from the selfishness of others that usually makes them selfish in turn because they feel the need to put themselves on the defensive. Seeing that others think only of themselves and not of them, they are in turn led to be concerned about themselves more than about others. Let the principle of charity and fraternity be the basis of social institutions and the legal relations between nations and individuals, and all will think less of themselves when they see that others are doing so too. Thus, they will undergo the moralizing the influences of example and contact. In the light of the present overflowing selfishness, true virtue is needed to sacrifice one's own personality for the sake of others who generally do not recognize it. It is to those, above all, who possess this virtue that the kingdom of heaven is opened. For them, especially, is reserved the bliss of the elect, because I can truly tell you that the day of judgment, those who have only thought of themselves will be cast aside and will suffer abandonment. Ooh. Oh man. Hi Mary. Yeah, no, the divination part of this live ended at 7 o'clock. I only do it from 6:30 to 7. Okay, we are almost done. Okay. Laudable efforts. Actually, no. Oh no, that's a quote. Okay, let me go back. So that's a quote by Fenelon. Laudable efforts doubtlessly have been made to help humankind advance. Good sentiments are encouraged, stimulated, and honored today more than any other time, and yet the devouring worm of selfishness continues to be the scourge of society. It is true evil that is scattered throughout the world and of which everyone is more or less a victim. Therefore, it is necessary to fight it as if we were fighting an epidemic. To this end, we must proceed as physicians do. Go back to the cause. Let us seek out in every structure of the social organization, from the family to the nations, from the hovel to the palace, all the causes, all the patent or hidden influences that excite, maintain, and develop the sentiment of selfishness. Once the causes are known, the remedy will present itself. We will only need to fight them, if not completely, then at least partly, and little by little the poison will be drawn out. The cure may take a long time because the causes are numerous, but it is not impossible. Moreover, we cannot reach that point unless we attack the evil at its roots. That is through education. Not the education that aims only to educate people, however, rather the education that also aims to make them moral individuals. When it is rightly understood, education will be the key to moral progress. When the art of managing characters is understood as well as the art of managing intelligences, we will be able to correct characters in the same way that we straighten new plants. However, this art requires much tact, much experience, and profound observation. It is a serious error to believe that it is enough to simply have knowledge in order to apply it advantageously. However, as observed, the children of the wealthy as well as of the poor, from the moment of their birth, noticing all the harmful influences that act on them as a result of the weakness, ignorance, and negligence of those who guide them, and also noticing how often the means employed to moralize them usually fail, will not be surprised to find so many shortcomings in the world. Let efforts be made toward morality as much as towards intelligence, and we will see that if it were there if it were there an obstinate nature, there are also in a great number than you might think those who require only good cultivation in order to yield good fruit. People want to be happy, and that is the sentiment in their very nature. That is why they work without ceasing in order to improve their situation on earth, and it is to seek out the causes of their ills in order to cure them. When they rightly understand the selfishness is one of those causes, that it might engender the pride, ambition, cupidity, envy, hatred, and jealousy of which they are every moment the victim, that it brings trouble into all social relations, provokes dissension, and destroys trust, obligating them to consistently maintain a defensive attitude towards their neighbors, that it engenders a sentiment that converts friend into foe, then they will also understand that this vice is incompatible with their own happiness. We would add that it is incompatible with their own safety as well. Thus, the more they suffer as a result of it, the more they will feel the need to fight it as they would a plague, harmful animals, and all other scourges. They will be compelled to do so out of their own self interest. Selfishness is the source of all vices, as charity is the source of all virtues. Destroying the former and developing the latter should be the aim of all people's efforts if they wish to ensure their happiness in this world as well as in the future. So that was a quote from Fenelon. Now we're on the subject of the characteristics of a moral person. We are at 8 o'clock. So we're going to stop there and pick this up next Sunday. I am here every Sunday, you guys. We do our live. We started at 6:30, and from 6:30 to 7, I do free readings for everyone on TikTok, first come, first serve. And then promptly at 7 o'clock, from 7 to 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we read from our book. So I really hope that you guys join us next Sunday, which is, let me see, the 18th. In the meantime, does anyone have any questions about what we just talked about and anything else you would like to know? Oh, thank you. Yes, it is. All right, so we have no questions. Thank you guys so much for joining me. Much love, much appreciation, many blessings, Lucy Progreso, grace, and all the wonderful things I wish for you all. Have a good night, everyone. I'm going to start here.